So my name is Heather Lamonides Brown. I'm the curator of modern European art here at the Cleveland Museum of Art. And we're thrilled to have this Monet in Focus exhibition open from now until August 11th this summer. The reason that we're able to borrow 3 paintings from the Musée Marmottan Monet in Paris is because we lent very generously, I think, to their 2022 Monet Mitchell exhibition. That was a show when they paired the late work of Claude Monet with American abstract expressionist Joan Mitchell. And she, as you probably know, lived in France for many years. She was a passionate admirer of Monet's late work, and her work is deeply, deeply influenced by his water lily garden paintings. So they paired Monet and Mitchell together, and what they wanted to do was to reunite one of the Grande Decoration, one of the water lily triptychs, and have that as a centerpiece of their Monet Mitchell show. So what they did was they asked Cleveland, St. Louis, and Kansas City, the Nelson Atkins Museum, if we would lend, the 3 Midwest American museums, if we would each lend one of the panels of the triptych, the Water Lilies Agapanthus triptych. And as you may know, Cleveland owns one of those panels of that specific triptych. And so the 3 Midwest museums agreed, yes, we will each lend one of these panels, but we'd like something in return, please. And we would like for the Musée Marmottan to please lend each of the 3 Midwest paintings 3 pictures from their collection. And as I'm sure you all know, the Musée Marmottan has the best, largest collection of Monet's work in the world. And so they lent us 3 paintings. The first one is a study of Rouen Cathedral, and then on the other side of the gallery there's a water lily picture and a Japanese picture. So I'm going to walk you through the 5 paintings in this exhibition, 2 of which are in the CMA's collection, and tell you about how we've conceived of this as a small focused exhibition. So the first work, I'm going to stand right over here, and you're welcome to come up close. The first work in the gallery is one of the paintings that Monet did on one of his 2 trips to the Mediterranean. Monet was an inveterate traveler. He was always traveling in France and even beyond France, in England and in Venice, to find motifs for his paintings. So in 1884 and 1888, he made 2 trips to the Mediterranean. This is from his 1888 trip to Antibes, and it's called Gardener's House at Antibes. And so you know, Monet was a northerner. He was from Normandy. And if some of you are from Normandy, which I know at least a couple of you are, there are probably lots of gray skies like in Cleveland and moody weather because it's close to the sea. But the Mediterranean offered him kind of a new vision, a whole new vision of southern light and color, of a different kind of water, of the Mediterranean, blue skies, the mountains, and warm golden light. And these are the elements that he captured or tried to capture in his paintings of the Mediterranean. And you might think, oh, an artist going to the Mediterranean, spending a couple of months there painting, that sounds like a lovely vacation. But he didn't actually treat these trips like vacations. He treated them like very rigorous painting campaigns almost, where he was almost like a gold miner, trying to dig out the themes and the motifs where he would be, wherever he was, and trying to come up with new subjects for his art that no one else was painting at the time. So he's using a lot of contrast here of warm and cool colors. Notice, of course, all the cool blue and green tones that are then set off, complemented by the warm tones, the gold, the kind of pink or salmon colors. And by putting on this one wall 2 pictures, one from 1888 and one from 1892, these are paintings that he was making before he really dedicated himself to painting his own water lily paintings at Giverny. We're looking at how his work right before dedicating himself to the garden pictures kind of foreshadows the work that would happen later. So keep these contrasts of cool and warm tones in your mind as we go on, and also know that in his planting of his garden, he would try to, in his Normandy Giverny garden, he would try to evoke some of the colors and the brightness and the contrast that he found in the Mediterranean in his flower garden at Giverny. So let's walk down to the Rouen Cathedral painting. He chose Rouen Cathedral as a motif for his paintings very, very deliberately. Rouen had been the capital of Normandy. It was in the Middle Ages where the coronations of the kings occurred. In France, it was even the site where Joan of Arc was burned at the stake. The cathedral was very, very famous. It was a tourist attraction. So when he chose that subject to paint for a whole series of paintings, and this is around the time when he is painting in series, multiple paintings of very, very similar views, he chose it very deliberately. It was like if a New Yorker chose the Statue of Liberty, or a Parisian chose the Eiffel Tower. It said, France in big capital letters, the Rouen Cathedral. This particular painting is one, I think we're incredibly lucky to get it, because it shows you not only what he painted, but how he painted. It's an incomplete or unfinished painting, more or less acting as a study, if you will. And we see him, he's probably painted this in maybe half a dozen or 8 painting sessions. It's not as fully worked up as some of the ones, maybe you've seen them at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston or in other museums. But this gives you a sense of how he was laying on the paint, how he was using brushwork to suggest a surface of stone. And not only stone, but light on stone. And so this is painted probably in the afternoon, and it has the whole top part of the cathedral is bathed in a warm light, but the bottom part of the cathedral is already in shadow. And you see him using a myriad of tones, lavenders, grays, blues, certainly, highlights of white, to suggest that shadow. He's still, I would say, an impressionist in the 2 paintings on this wall. And what the impressionists tried to do, in a word, was to capture the effects of light and atmosphere on anything. It could be on a woman sewing by a window, it could be a cafe scene, it could be a building, it could be a natural setting, a landscape. So he's using light and atmosphere as a way to capture fleeting impressions. An hour later, half an hour later, this would look different. In his later water lily paintings, which we'll look at next, he goes beyond impressionism. I would say he goes beyond what can be seen with the visual eye, with the physical eye, and he goes beyond that to think about what was being seen in his mind's eye, what was being seen in a creative artist's eye. And he bought special imported water lilies. This is a painting from 1908, and it was a time when he was making incredibly daring paintings of the water lily pond. And when you look at this, what we're seeing here is the mirror-like surface of the pond. It's late in the day, it's in the afternoon. The warm sunlight of the setting sun is reflected in the surface of the pond. And you see clumps of the water lilies, but I think you also see shadows. And those are shadows of the surrounding willow trees that are around the crags. So this is, as I mentioned, this is part of what he called the Grande Décoration, where he meant for paintings to be very large and immersive. This is about 6 feet tall and about 14 feet wide. And it's part of a triptych, so that's ×3. It was enveloping. I'm sure many of you have been to the Orangerie in Paris, where there are 22 of these Grande Décorations on permanent display. What was intended here was literally, in this term that we use so often now in the 21st century, immersive experiences. Usually that's digital or video, but he had it in a kind of analog experience with actual paintings. He started making this painting around this triptych in 1915, and probably continued working on it for at least 10 years, or maybe even up until the time of his death in 1926. You may wonder, why is this called Water Lilies agapanthus? If any of you are gardeners, you might think, I don't see an agapanthus here. We know from photographs and from x-rays, photographs that were taken around 1920 and 1921, that this painting actually, and all three of the paintings in the triptych, actually looked quite different earlier in the time that Monet was painting it. It had a large agapanthus plant in the lower left corner, and that kind of plant is called the lily of the Nile. It's got a lot of leaves down at the bottom, and then a long shoot and a kind of lily-like flower. And they came in all kinds of bold reds and pink colors. And so he had that growing on the bank of his water lily pond, but he chose to paint it out. Over a period of time, this particular triptych became more and more diaphanous. It became more and more abstract. I see some people nodding. And it is very intentionally kind of moody and blurry. And I would say this is probably partly why it appealed so much to the abstract expressionist painters like Joan Mitchell and others who were so drawn to these pictures in the 1950s and 60s. But it became increasingly abstract and meditative and moody. One of the, let me tell you for a moment about Monet as a gardener. He was very well educated himself, self-educated in gardening. He chose all the plants himself. He consulted with the top horticulturalists at the time. When he first bought the property, he had enlisted his own two sons and his companions' children to garden in the garden themselves, but eventually he was able to hire about 6 gardeners to help maintain this property. He had both a flower garden outside the house, which maybe some of you have been to, and then this water garden. And it really became the subject for his art in the last, I would say, 20 years of his life. He had traveled extensively, as I said, to the Mediterranean, to Rouen, to London, to Venice, but the whole garden became his subject later in life. He was older, travel was more difficult, but he found in his garden such richness that he wanted to paint it again and again. Now, this triptych was originally intended to be part of the gift of paintings that he gave to the French government at the end of World War I. He was friends with Georges Clemenceau, who was the Prime Minister of France at the time, and Monet first proposed, I'd like to give France 2 paintings to commemorate the end of the war and the victory and the peace. Well, that number grew to 12, and then it eventually grew to 22. So an entire enveloping environment of these grandes décorations. Originally, he wanted this triptych to be a part of that group that was given to France, but eventually, I think because of revising them and rethinking them, he withdrew them from the final gift and chose other paintings and held this triptych in his studio. He dies in 1926. You may be wondering, how did this painting wind up in Cleveland, Ohio, of all places? Well, he held the triptych along with a number of other works, many of which are in the collection of the Marmottan today, in his studio, and he died, and all the paintings in that studio and his property went to his son Michel. And so it wasn't until 1955 that they were purchased by a Parisian woman named Katia Granoff. She was a poet and she was an art dealer, and she showed this triptych in her gallery. Some savvy New York art dealers saw that exhibition of water lily paintings, and they purchased the triptych. They're Knoedler and Company. It's still a very famous art gallery in New York. They in turn brought the paintings to New York City. They had an exhibition of water lily paintings, of which this triptych was the centerpiece. And rather quickly, I think it was St. Louis who bought the central panel first, Nelson Atkins who bought the right panel, and then in 1960 Cleveland bought the left panel. So that's how the three paintings wound up in these Midwest collections. They have been reunited occasionally. It's not easy to travel paintings this large, of course. They were reunited in 2012, most recently in 2013, for a large exhibition that was called Painting the Modern Garden, Monet to Matisse. Some of you may have seen that. That was here at the Cleveland Museum of Art and also at the Royal Academy of Arts in London.